So that would be good to do if you were using like a number as a string in some other places, and then all of a sudden you realized you needed to use it as a number to just do that conversion. Okay.
It can also help you if you want to compare something, like you know your script is supposed to receive a number. It happens a lot in the address of a page. You'll see sometimes you go to a web page and it's got question mark, something equals something at the top. That's a value that's being passed to the script that says load this. For instance, we have property profiles on our sites like hotels, and I'm passing the ID number in the database of the hotel. But hackers will try to put scripts in there, they'll try to put in like database query stuff in there to get your passwords out of your system and to try to take over your system. And so if you start passing that stuff to the database, you've got a problem. You want to make sure that that's a number before you pass it to the database. So here you can run inval on that string, and if that resolves to the same thing as the string itself, then you know you've got a number. Because if they start passing letters in there, then it's not going to compute the same way. So that would be one possible use of it. We're just getting into variable definitions. Everything on the screen should be pretty self-explanatory.
Don't worry. The PHP I know is includes.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
In addition to strings and numbers, another major type that you'll encounter are Booleans, which are just true or false. They only have two states. So, for instance, it's too early for this morning. That's going to resolve as true once I define that. You can also set it to false. You can set it to 1 or to 0. And this will help you when you have an if statement in your script. If this is true, then run this code. And that will help quite a bit with that. It's basically a logical organization. There's nothing complicated about it.
So those are the only options, 0 or 1?
Correct. True or false. True or false. And again, there's no quotation marks around that because it is resolving as a state. If you put quotation marks around it, then it's going to turn it into a string, which has a value of 1, which also has a value of true. You can see how they're interchangeable because the string exists. The last type is a little bit complicated, which are arrays. An array is a collection of variables that are defined as a set. So, let's define an array here of first names and last names. Now, an array is a group of variables that are defined together. If I am referring to this array, and I say within that, within brackets, what the first value is, I will return the second value. So if I say, give me Joe out of this array, then it's going to echo Parisi, because it's going to echo the value that matches that. Does it make sense? An array is a collection of key value pairs. They're called elements as a pair. But the key is what defines it. It's the label that defines it, and then the value is simply the value of that variable. So I've defined a bunch of variables in this script that I've grouped together. The value of grouping them together like this is that you can always compute them as a set. If I have, without arrays, I would have to run through each one manually. I would have to have a line in the code for Marianne, a line for Travis, a line for Joe, a line for Mike. In this case, I don't have to do that. I simply group them together as an array, and I run through the array, and for each instance in the array, then I run my line of code. So I can have 50,000 names in the array, and I only have to have one line of code. I just keep looping through it until I run out of names. That's the power of it. Anytime, and we'll get into database queries next week, but when you get information back from the database, it's going to be in a set like this. It's going to be, 20,000 hotels, or 100 names, or 7 days of the week, or whatever data set that you're working with. It's going to come back as a set like this that you're going to loop through. But arrays are a little more complicated than basic variables. If you define arrays without any kind of key on them, they'll have a numerical key starting with 0. So if I say at this point, the first element in the array is the key is 0 and the value is Marianne. And the second one, the key is 1 and the value is Travis. And if I were to go on, then key 2 would be equal to Joe. In this case, because I'm not defining what the key is, it's just going to fill in a number as the key. It may be, everybody getting the idea of this?
Key, greater sign?
The equal sign and greater than is what defines the key and value pair if you're going to define it that way.
Gotcha. Now I see it. I didn't see the equal
Sure.
sign. Okay. So that's what
This,
the key.
right, it's saying this is equal to this,
Equal
and
to
then
that.
this is equal to
Okay.
this, and so on. And a
Gotcha.
comma separated list.
So if you
And
get
so-
Marian's name, you do echo $, your name is equals 1, or 0, I mean, equals bracket 0.
Because
And then
it's
that would print Marian's name on the screen.
If I want to add to this, if I want to add another one on the end, say I want to add Joe's name to this array, I would say just empty brackets. And then it's going to fill in Joe's name as the next one in the array using the next available integer, which would be 2 on the list. The PHP has this weird thing where it always counts starting from 0 if you don't tell it start counting from 1. It gets into how processors run and how they compute integers and so on, but it always starts counting from 0 and goes up from there. You just get used to it. Days of the week are 0 through 6, for instance. It's weird that way.
So really 0 is a value that is important. So like.
Well, that in some ways yes, in some ways no.
No.
Yeah, I know. It's one of the quirks of the system. It's you find this in almost all programming languages. It's just something you get used to. I think there's anything else I need to mention about arrays so far. It may be easier to picture your array when you're defining it to actually spell it out on multiple lines. And like I said, with PHP, as long as you end everything in a semicolon, you can space things out however you want to, whatever makes sense for you. So this is perfectly fine for defining an array if you want. You can have anything in here. So in this case, I've made them all strings, but I can make one of them integer if I want to. I can make one of them Boolean if I want to. I can make it another array if I want to. You can make these values whatever you want to. When you start getting into nested arrays, like multi-dimensional arrays, that's where you get really complicated. Because I've got an array of people, and then for each one I have an array of values that are associated with them, like maybe your departments, and then within each department I maybe have a sub-array of like projects that you're working on in your department. And that's when you start getting into advanced programming, that's what you're dealing with. But it's fine, you can handle that as long as you get the idea of arrays. You can always run code within that. So those are our variable types. There are a handful of other types that you'll encounter if you establish a database connection that is treated as a resource, for which we use an R variable, but that's the only time you'll encounter that in almost all programming. That's pretty much it. Any other questions so far? All right, we're ahead of schedule. That's cool.